So someone asked, what if you have an anxious avoidance attachment style? And they've admitted, I had different styles with different men. Okay, let's get into that. So what I've noticed, let's say, for example, you were a woman that was raised with both your mom and your dad. Let's say you have a little bit of both mommy and daddy issues. Let's say simultaneously, you also have the anxious avoidant attachment styles. What I find so often is women in particular, they will often date men that remind them of their mother, and they will also date men that remind them of their dad. And this is so interesting because so often people will have like an avoidant attachment style and find themselves in this pattern where they'll date people that are anxious that will cause them to run, and then they'll bump into someone who now almost makes their attachment style change. Like, say, for example, maybe you're avoidant and then you date someone who is also avoidant, right? Then all of a sudden it triggers your anxious attachment style, or it causes you to develop an anxious attachment style. And what that would start to look like is technically being avoidant or never needing to chase a man. And all of a sudden you find yourself like plucking your edges, wondering where the fuck he's at. Why hasn't he texted me back? And mind you, this is probably new behaviors for you, right? And depending on how you're able to navigate that, I'll usually see women might end up perpetuating the same pattern by getting sucked into something that triggers an anxious attachment style in them. And some women that cannot really navigate that, they'll cease dating men that have an avoidant attachment style because they don't like feeling anxious. And usually avoidant men will trigger their anxious attachment style. So some women will instead, because they prefer to reside on the more avoidant side, they'll date men that tend to chase them. Or even being avoidant and dating men that have more of an anxious attachment style kind of causes them to become a bit more secure and lean into the dynamic. It's almost like it's a preference thing, and depending on where your mommy or your daddy issues comes into play.
Let's talk about women with daddy issues and the anxious attachment style. Let me give you a few example scenarios of women that may have daddy issues or may have experienced their father in childhood that led to them choosing partners that made them feel the same way. And that right there, that trigger usually plays out to let you guys know, hey, this right here is indicative of having daddy issues. Now, if you have the anxious attachment style, here's a way to know if you have the anxious attachment style and daddy issues, or your anxious attachment style occurred as a result of having issues from your father. Now, usually the dynamic between a daughter and a father, where in which the daughter ends up with an anxious attachment style, it's usually created by a father that was emotionally unavailable, or a father that would often gaslight you. Those fathers that made you question whether he was going to ever really show up. Those fathers that made promises and literally fed you, I don't want to say lies, but they often told you what they were going to do. They would call and say, oh, I'm going to be there in an hour, I'm going to be there in 2 hours, or they would call the last minute and say, I'm not going to make it today. Those women that had the father that was there, but almost not really there, often created this anxiously preoccupied child. Mix that with a child that was parentified. What's so common between the anxious attachment style and the daddy issues is those women were often parentified. It's being worried about men that are not worried about you. But somehow you're clinging onto this dynamic and you're seeking validation, emotional security from someone that will never have that available. The fact that he makes you feel like your father, chances are you'll never probably feel secure with him. Yes, people can change, but if this man is not aware of the ways in which he show up like your father, and he can't change because he's not aware of that or the sensitivity to it, you'll have to leave him. One time, I was meeting with a client, and he would say things like, "Oh, she claims that I remind her of her father," and mind you, her father's not really a good person. So I was really offended. That's what the guy said. He was offended that she felt like he was like her father. And he was just like, I'm nothing like the father. And technically, he wasn't. But when you look at the behaviors on paper, the ways in which he was not able to show up, it was the same ways in which the father was not able to show up. And the entire time, him and the father were both emotionally unavailable and not communicating why they were not able to show up. And mind you, if this is your partner, you're supposed to express that. But people that are anxiously preoccupied would spend a lot of time never knowing. So that's what often comes up. So let's talk about the presentation of women with daddy issues and the avoidant attachment style. This is very common for those women that operate from a very independent place. A lot of people tend to think that a woman will have daddy issues if her father wasn't there. But what many people don't speak about are the women with, yes, daddy issues, even when their father is there. So what will often create an avoidant attachment style is, I don't want to say emotional neglect, but you learn to not feel safe. You tend to either lean out of situations where in which you prefer to handle things on your own. Women with avoidant attachment style tend to turn internally or lean out of situations to resolve their emotional issues. These women can often attract men with the anxious attachment style or those that are anxiously preoccupied. So it'll create this dynamic where they'll be in situations running from people. Usually avoidants can find themselves in situations pulling away from people that are pulling at them. Long story short, avoidant attachment style can make you present as emotionally unavailable. A lot of times people that are emotionally unavailable for whatever the reasons, they tend to pull away whenever things get rough. And as you know, no one's perfect, so we're going to go through ups and downs. But those that are avoidant, they'll spend a lot of time often trying to escape, lean out of situations, pull away. These are the women that will literally block you and disappear, okay? You get one chance with them, okay? Women with avoidant attachment style and daddy issues, how they often present is emotionally unavailable. These women, depending on the severity of the disconnect from the father, they can truly walk away from male dysfunctional situations and not care. However, the woman with daddy issues, where in which the father was there but emotionally unavailable, they can often find themselves in situations clinging to it, but kind of passively hanging on. But it's almost like they don't have the full security that they want, where it's the men being emotionally available. So they'll attract men that are emotionally unavailable, which will also perpetuate their emotionally unavailableness. And just because you had a father that was there does not mean that you're immune to daddy issues. The worst kind of situations is when their parents were there but were not doing well. You pretty much not only have to learn what's good, but you have to unlearn what they've taught you. Women with daddy issues and avoidant attachment style, you can often question if they actually like you. They struggle with reciprocating romance, and they can also repel that. Sometimes they can even repel men that are truly providing security and often reject them. I want to make something very simple for you ladies that has this tendency to like men who don't like you. In general, people or women that grew up in a household where they saw or they rarely saw their mom being loved. If you're a woman that come from a generation of women that were in relationships with very misogynistic or patriarchal men, if you grew up never seeing your mom loved, if you grew up without a father or, your mom having a partner that would be able to display behaviors that says she is loved, chances are you don't know what it looks like for a woman to be loved. Also, if you grew up seeing your mom being mistreated, right, but have these attachments to people that mistreat her, in adulthood, you tend to develop this tendency to like people that don't like you. And when they start to like you, you no longer like them. It's the fact that what you learned about love is disinterest. You grew up seeing women having attachment to men that rarely love them. So when we tell you women to choose better, it's really about choosing men that can really love you. So society will, chastise men for being submissive. But it's the fact that unless you get a man that's like submissive to you or really soft with you, or like what they call it, like they like to call the good guys, the men that are actually equipped to love you and also be able to teach your kids how to receive and give love. And that's what men really need in particular. Like as a woman, it's very important for you to find a partner, especially if you have a son, that can display behaviors of what it means to love a woman. Many men, especially within the Black community or any culture where the men and the partnerships, like there's a lot of misogyny there, these women rarely get the opportunity to understand what it looks like to receive love. But what we'll notice is in the same culture, these men will expect you to teach them how to treat you, which is also why I encourage women to date, outside of their race, because there is a deficit of love within the Black community. And it's very obvious that the men need you to teach them how to treat you. You see what I'm saying? And also, if they don't have fathers and you can't control the fathers and they keep telling you to choose better, at this point, you have to put yourself in situations in order to learn how to be treated better. It's the fact that a lot of these men won't do well. They're not doing well within their own community, but they'll go someplace else for a woman to save them and fix them up a bit. And maybe those women are in a position. You see what I'm saying? That's over in other cultures, maybe those women are receiving love more. But you Black women, you have to put yourself in that position to learn better. But in general, you women need to learn what love looks like in action.